Chapter 15, The Cubans. Stories about guards beating Cuban prisoners began to surface about 1 month after the Cubans arrived at Leavenworth. Lieutenant Thh Germany, who was responsible for investigating alleged staff brutality in the prison, decided to snoop around. The guards in C and D cell houses quickly closed both their ranks and their lips. "We were really pissed, a guard recalled. "All of us had been pulling double shifts, working our butts off, and now Germany was looking over our shoulders." Another guard added, "You gotta understand, Cubans were throwing piss and shit on us. They were fucking animals. There wasn't any staff brutality. Sometimes a Cuban would give us a shot, a legitimate shot at him. For example, he would resist or he'd take a swing at an officer. And when that happened, you're damn right, that Cuban got smacked around. But it was good for them and good for us. You gotta understand, these fucking Cubans only understand violence. Nobody was beating the shit out of them, but a guy might pull a Cuban's cuffs up between his shoulder blades when he was being taken somewhere just to give him a message. Hey, you fuck with us, we'll fuck with you." Someone like Germany didn't understand that. The other guard continued. Lieutenant Schultz knew what was going on. He knew that what we were doing wasn't staff brutality, it was staff survival. The relationship between Germany and Schultz turned icy as Germany continued to probe. Most days, they avoided each other. By the end of February 1988, Germany was able to document some minor incidents. He knew that guards in one cell house had written, "Hang the Cubans on a wall." Someone had made a hangman's noose from a string and left them dangling in front of several cells. The nooses were supposed to scare the Cubans by reminding them that guards could hang a prisoner in his cell and later claim he had committed suicide. But other than those two incidents, Germany hadn't really learned a thing. On March 6, 1988, Germany and Schultz both happened to be working the day shift and by chance met at the coffee pot in the lieutenant's office. Since it was a slow Sunday afternoon, they sat down together. "Phil, I know you believe in the Holy Bible. Do you believe there is a heaven?" Germany asked at one point. Schultz laughed. "I'm going to be one pissed off motherfucker if there's not." The next time that Germany thought about Schultz was when he heard that Schultz had been murdered. Elke Schultz was cooking hamburgers at Homer's, a local Leavenworth drive-in, when a prison guard called and asked her to come home immediately. It was just before 7 p.m. on March 7th, a Monday, and as she hurried home, she figured something had happened to one of her two sons, who were the ages of 15 and 14. Guards were clustered outside the brick house that the Schultzes rented from the bureau only a few hundred feet from the prison walls and refused to let her go inside. "Are my sons okay?" she immediately asked when Warden Matthews came to get her. Matthews nodded. "Both boys were fine," he said, "but her husband was dead." Schultz's body had been found lying on the family living room floor. He had been shot twice with a 12-gauge shotgun, once in the head. Lieutenant Schultz was buried 4 days later at Belden Funeral Chapel in Leavenworth. Warden Matthews helped plan the funeral. The pallbearers included Thh Germany, Stephen Myhan, Stephen Hobart, Edward Pierce, William Kindig, Monty Watkins, Billy Thomas, and William Blount, all hothouse lieutenants. A prison chaplain gave the eulogy. Everyone agreed afterward that the funeral had been a fitting tribute to a man whose life had revolved around the bureau. It wasn't until later that night at Benny's that guards began asking the one question on everyone's mind. What had Schultz done that would cause his own teenage sons to kill him? Michael Harris, an assistant federal public defender, was filing papers at the courthouse in Topeka on March 8, 1988, when he was asked to represent two juveniles who had been arrested for shooting their father. "A 12-gauge shotgun is a rather drastic way to deal with the problem," Harris said later. "But after talking to the boys, I realized that this was a violent home, a very violent home." Harris had represented victims of domestic violence before. This is how he later constructed the shooting. Schultz started arguing with his 15-year-old son and during a moment of rage, slugged the boy in the chin, knocking him unconscious. Then Schultz turned toward his 14-year-old and repeatedly snapped, "You're next." The boy grabbed a double-barrel shotgun and fired both chambers at his father. Harris immediately sent an investigator to Leavenworth to conduct interviews and take photographs of the murder scene. But the day after the shooting, the investigator called with disturbing news. When he got to the Schultz's house, Harris said, The family's belongings had been moved out. The place had been scrubbed clean. Even the bloodstains in the carpet had been cut out and the carpet repaired, all within 48 hours of the death. My suspicion was that the Bureau didn't want Schultz's past to come out, and for a very good reason. There was more at stake than embarrassment, Harris believed. Every prison case that I've ever done usually comes down to who you believe, the guard or the inmate. When there is a fight, the guard says the inmate started it, and the inmate says the guard started it. Those cases are always resolved in favor of the guards. In every one of those cases, we try to get access to the guard's personnel file to see if he's gotten into trouble before, and the government always resists this to the maximum. The Bureau doesn't want defense lawyers mucking around inside a guard's personnel file, and I think everyone knew that in a homicide case, we were going to get inside Schultz's file. The Bureau didn't want to set a precedent, and it sure didn't want us peeking into Schultz's file. Within a week, Harris had obtained copies of his juvenile client's medical and school records. They were replete with suspicions expressed by school personnel through the years, Harris said. There were reports of the kid showing up at school with unexplained bruises, black eyes, and other injuries, yet no one did anything about it because Schultz always lived on a Bureau reservation. No one wanted to interfere. Harris got a call from the U.S. Attorney's Office a short time later. The complaint against the boys was dropped without explanation. Someone had figured out what was going on in the Schultz's house, and they didn't want the case coming to light, Harris said. It's only my suspicion, but I believe the Bureau just made a decision early on that this case was more of a problem than it was worth. Both boys were released to their mother. After her husband's funeral, Elke Schultz moved away from Leavenworth. I was worried about my 14-year-old, how he'd take it, but he said he had a dream about his daddy, and his daddy told him that it wasn't his fault and that he shouldn't feel bad about shooting him, said Miss Schultz, pausing long enough to wipe her eyes. He said his daddy told him that he is very happy where he is now, very happy, and that helped. When Elke and Philip Schultz first met at a party in Wiesbaden, West Germany, back in August of 1972, she was a single German mother raising 3 small children, 2 boys and a girl. He was a brash, street-smart U.S. serviceman stationed at the local base. Philip really could talk, she said. He had me laughing and feeling good. He could have been a lawyer, the kind of lawyer you hired if you stole something, because he could have gone to court and gotten you off. 5 months after they met, Philip and Elke married. On their wedding night, Schultz said he didn't believe a husband and wife should keep secrets from each other, but there was an incident in his past that he had never told anyone, and even though he loved her, he couldn't yet bring himself to reveal it. Why not, Phil? She asked. I just couldn't tell anyone, baby, he replied. Maybe on our 10th anniversary I'll tell you. Elke Schultz quickly forgot about the secret, she said. Phil was super smart and sweet. He was a very loving and gentle man, particularly with my daughter. He was tender around her, and he was good with my 2 boys. I really didn't care what this secret was. Within a year, Elke gave birth to a son. When Philip Schultz was discharged in 1975, the family moved to his hometown of Kansas City, and he scanned the classified advertisements for work. Leavenworth was hiring, and Schultz signed on. He didn't like it at first, but we needed the money, and Phil thought he could move up fast. For 5 years, Schultz worked at the hot house, and it was during that time he changed, Elke Schultz later recalled. He got harder, became distant. Whenever the kids did something wrong, he got real angry. I mean real angry. I'd say, Phil, kids will be kids. They're going to make mistakes. He'd say, not mine. They ain't never ending up in a place like Leavenworth. If Schultz gave an order, he expected the children to jump. If Elke interfered, he accused her of being weak. It was the same lingo, she noticed, that he used to describe guards who gave in to convicts. I found out later that he was beating the kids when I was at work. When Schultz was promoted to a medium security prison in Raybrook, New York, Elke hoped things would improve. Her husband was no longer working in such a hostile prison, but the Schultz's home life continued to deteriorate. One day, Phil was playing cards with the kids, and he would get mad when he lost, so he was cheating. Imagine cheating your own kids. But he told me that it was the same sort of stuff I heard when he and his buddies from prison got together. Everyone had to respect you in prison. You couldn't let anyone beat you at anything. When Schultz got promoted to the rank of lieutenant at the prison in La Tuna, Texas, a few miles north of El Paso, Elkie Schultz again hoped for the best. His new assignment was at a level 2 prison, a lower ranking than Ray Brook and much lower than the Hot House. Elkie's oldest son had recently joined the military, leaving only 3 children at home to feed and clothe. It got worse, not better, Elkie said. The prison just wouldn't leave him alone. The phone was always ringing, and he was always having to choose between it and us. One night, Phil accused me of having boyfriends, and I didn't have any boyfriends. The next night, he apologized. The next morning, he accused me again. The turmoil inside the home became violent when Schultz found his stepdaughter kissing an older boy while they were both in a parked car. Elkie tried to intervene, and Schultz slapped her as well as his stepdaughter. The next day, Elkie told the children and moved to a motel. Schultz begged them to return. She refused. Several days later, she received a long letter from her husband. In it, he revealed to her the secret that he had mentioned on their wedding night. After reading the letter, Elkie Schultz moved back in with her husband. That is when they decided to get a fresh start by returning to Leavenworth. Phil promised to change, and he didn't hit the kids at first. He couldn't keep all that anger bottled up inside at work and at home. He had to let it out, and he took it out on us. Schultz was having an especially tough time with his 15-year-old stepson. At Christmas, Schultz bought his stepdaughter an expensive stereo record player and gave his 14-year-old son a new bicycle. But Schultz gave his stepson one pair of white socks. That was all. In January 1988, Elkie Schultz won $500 playing bingo and sent her husband on a weekend trip to Las Vegas, Nevada by himself, just to get him away from the Cuban units. He had a blast, and when he arrived home, it was like I saw the old Phil. But then the phone rang, and it was the prison, and he left. And when he came back, he had changed back into that other person. After the funeral, Elkie Schultz called her children into her bedroom and read them the letter that her husband had sent her in La Tuna. She shared his secret. Now that he was dead, she said, he couldn't be embarrassed by what it revealed. When Phil was 6 years old, he was raped by a boy named Willie. He's dead now, but he raped Phil 5 or 6 times until Phil threatened to tell, said Elkie Schultz, who still has the letter. Schultz wrote that he had hated Willie and felt guilty because he had never taken revenge by killing him. It is difficult for me to understand, but the fact he was raped and working in prison did something to him. I don't know what, but it made him feel like he had to do something to make sure that people like Willie stayed locked up, Elkie Schultz said. I think the hate and anger just swallowed him up.